Vanessa's face contorted with shock and rage. She tried to push her way past the security guard, but he didn't move an inch. My father, already turning red with embarrassment, began shouting threats. "We'll call the police. Do you know who we are? We're paying for this wedding, and we'll have you fired." The security guard, unfazed, responded, "Feel free to call the police, sir. I was hired by the bride and groom, and I'm following their instructions. No one is allowed in without their approval." Meanwhile, inside the venue, I was waiting with my bridesmaids, my heart pounding. One of my friends, who wasn't part of the wedding party but knew our plan, sent me a quick text. "They're outside causing a scene. Security's handling it." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. This was it, the moment where everything we'd planned would unfold. Luke stood at the altar, playing his role perfectly. He looked out into the crowd, his expression a mix of anticipation and worry. Just as we had rehearsed, he glanced at me with a subtle nod. I stepped into view, and a collective gasp rippled through the room. My father, standing near the entrance, turned around just in time to see me walking down the aisle, the real bride. He fumbled with his phone as it rang. Vanessa was calling him. He mumbled an excuse and stepped outside to answer, leaving me to walk down the aisle alone. My bridesmaid whispered, "It's okay, Emma. You've got this." And I did. I walked forward, my chin held high, as whispers spread through the crowd. They were confused but intrigued. Luke's best friend, positioned strategically, shouted, "Where's her dad going?" to draw more attention to the chaos outside. The distraction was working. My mother, realizing what was happening, stood up, a look of horror spreading across her face. She shot a glare toward the entrance as my father stormed back inside, his expression a mix of shock and fury. I reached Luke and took his hands, squeezing them tightly. His eyes met mine, filled with pride. "You look beautiful," he whispered, and I felt a wave of reassurance wash over me. Suddenly, there was shouting from outside the venue. Guests began murmuring and craning their necks to see what was happening. Vanessa, unable to get past security, was making a scene. My mother rushed out to calm her, but the damage was done. The murmurs turned to gasps as more people realized that Vanessa was outside, dressed in a wedding gown, trying to force her way into my wedding. Luke and I shared a quick glance, the corners of his mouth lifting in a small, victorious smile. We turned to the officiant, who looked uncertain but continued as planned. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." As the ceremony progressed, my parents remained outside, torn between dealing with Vanessa and returning to their seats. Eventually, they gave up and stayed out, trying to salvage their dignity as whispers and side conversations filled the venue. My sister's wails could still be heard faintly through the closed doors, but the ceremony went on without a hitch. We said our vows, exchanged rings, and sealed our marriage with a kiss. The room erupted into applause, some louder than others as guests exchanged glances, piecing together what must have happened. I felt a mix of triumph and relief. For once, Vanessa didn't get her way, and my parents couldn't control the narrative. The reception was a blur of laughter, dancing, and toasts. Luke and I couldn't stop grinning at each other, sharing secret looks that spoke of victory. When the reception started, guests came up to congratulate us, some with knowing smiles and comments like, "That was quite the entrance," or, "Your wedding will definitely be remembered." A few hours into the party, Luke leaned in and whispered, "They're gone. Vanessa, your mom, and your dad left about an hour ago." I nodded, not surprised. They'd been humiliated, and sticking around would only draw more questions. The next day, while Luke and I were packing for our honeymoon, my phone buzzed incessantly with messages from my parents and Vanessa. I ignored them until one particularly long and venomous text from Vanessa caught my attention. "You ruined my life, Emma. I can't believe you would stoop so low and embarrass me like that. You'll pay for this, mark my words." Luke glanced over my shoulder, reading the message. He shook his head, took my phone, and snapped a screenshot. "We're going to document all of this. If they try anything, we'll be prepared." He sent the screenshots to our family group chat, adding, "This harassment needs to stop. We just wanted a peaceful wedding, and Emma shouldn't have to deal with this." Messages of support from my cousins and extended family poured in. It was clear that my parents and Vanessa had lost whatever favor they once held. As we boarded the plane for Europe, I felt a weight lift off my chest. The wedding was over, and my life with Luke was just beginning. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but for once, I had someone by my side who wouldn't let me fight alone. For years, I had been the shadow to Vanessa's spotlight, the scapegoat to my parents' unfair treatment. But on my wedding day, I finally reclaimed my place. I wasn't just Emma, the overlooked sister. I was Emma, the woman who took back control, who stood up for herself, and who found happiness despite the odds. And as we took off, leaving the past behind, I knew one thing for certain. I was done being the second choice. This was the start of a new chapter, one where I was no longer defined by my family's treatment, but by my own choices, strength, and the love that surrounded me. From as far back as I can remember, my life was a continuous struggle against the shadow of my older sister, Vanessa. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, while I, Emma, was always the disappointment. My parents' favoritism was more than just subtle, it was glaringly obvious. If Vanessa accused me of something, even without evidence, I would be punished without question. But if I had undeniable proof of her wrongdoing, she would get a mild reprimand, and I'd somehow end up being scolded too. Growing up, it felt like every important moment was overshadowed by my sister. Even my birthday cakes were always her favorite flavor, and my parents pretended not to notice that I hated it. Every gift, every outing, every shared family experience seemed to cater to Vanessa's desires. While she enjoyed lavish birthday parties, I was always an afterthought. I would sit on the sidelines, watching her blow out her candles while I picked at a cake that tasted like betrayal. Things got worse when we became teenagers. Vanessa, who was spoiled and often unpleasant, found herself without friends. Whether they moved away or got tired of her behavior, I never knew. We went to the same school, and it was clear she was alone. Meanwhile, I managed to maintain a decent social circle. I was friendly, approachable, and eager to form connections. This only fueled her resentment toward me. Vanessa began to see me not just as an annoyance, but as a rival. She accused me of things I hadn't done, made snide comments about me to our parents, and succeeded in isolating me from my friends. My parents, blinded by their unwavering loyalty to her, often said, "Why can't you be more like your sister and enjoy family time?" It didn't matter how hard I tried to explain that it was Vanessa's jealousy driving the wedge between us. What kept me going during those years was my extended family. My cousins were my safe haven, people who didn't see me as the other sister, but as Emma. They invited me to gatherings and made me feel included. At one of these events, I remember sadly telling a cousin that I wasn't allowed to go anywhere because Vanessa didn't have friends, so I wasn't permitted to have any either. Word got back to the adults, and my parents faced some serious questions from family members. I was grounded for lying, but after that incident, they gave me a bit more freedom. Vanessa's jealousy only grew. She switched schools after that, claiming she needed a fresh start, and my parents obliged, even though it meant a longer commute and higher tuition. At her new school, she made friends, but She never stopped making my life miserable. Her friends would visit our house and mock me, which my parents brushed off as light teasing. I never dared invite my friends over because my parents were terrible hosts, and Vanessa would accuse them of stealing, accusations that my parents believed without question. High school brought new challenges. I had my first boyfriend, Matt. I didn't want to bring him home, but my parents insisted. One day, Vanessa approached him while I was in another room. Dressed provocatively, she batted her eyelashes and told him how much better she was than me. Matt, uncomfortable and loyal, found me immediately to tell me what happened. When Vanessa spun the story to our parents, claiming Matt had flirted with her and she had nobly rejected him to protect me, my parents believed her without question. They forbade me from seeing him again, branding him dishonest and disrespectful. My resentment toward Vanessa and my parents grew deeper. I tried to keep seeing Matt in secret, but the pressure of my home life made it impossible, and we eventually broke up. A similar pattern repeated with my next boyfriend. Vanessa would flirt, get rejected, accuse, and my parents would side with her. It became clear that in their eyes, I was incapable of making good decisions or choosing the right people to trust. I became known at school as the girl who had flings but avoided relationships. The rumors stung, but they never reached my parents or Vanessa. The one relationship Vanessa had during high school was a source of constant comparison for me. Her boyfriend was paraded around like royalty, my parents constantly asking why I couldn't find someone as good as him. When that relationship inevitably ended, he suddenly became the villain who had tricked her, and my parents never admitted their prior praise had been misplaced. Vanessa's college journey only added to the inequality. She managed to get into a college, not a particularly prestigious one, and without a scholarship, but it was still celebrated like an Ivy League acceptance. My parents promised to pay for everything, including tuition, books, and living expenses. I was relieved that she would be out of the house, hoping it would bring some peace, but the peace was short-lived. She came home every weekend and somehow, issues in my life followed. My curfews remained strict and my parents watchful. Mistrusting eyes were always on me. When my turn came to discuss college, my mother sat me down. "Emma," she said with that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate, "we've spent a lot on Vanessa's education, so we won't be able to afford yours. You should start working after graduation. Maybe in a few years. We'll see if we can help you." I didn't flinch. I had been expecting this. "Okay," I said calmly, watching her eyes widen in surprise. She was expecting a tantrum, but I wasn't going to give her one. I had been planning my escape for years. I worked tirelessly to earn a scholarship, knowing it was my only way out. And I did it, not an Ivy League scholarship, but a full ride to a decent college with a strong program in my field. I posted my achievement on social media, making sure to thank my parents publicly so they couldn't back out without facing questions from extended family. They were forced to support my decision, at least outwardly, but their enthusiasm was half-hearted. My mother even slipped and mentioned Vanessa was struggling in college and implied that I would fail too. But I went, and it was the best decision I ever made. College was freedom. I thrived away from the toxic environment of my parents' house. I visited only on holidays and kept my distance otherwise, citing financial reasons. Vanessa eventually dropped out of college and moved back home, getting a job at my mother's company thanks to some pulled strings. My parents acted as if this was some great success and constantly compared her work ethic to mine, even though I was earning top grades and thriving independently. It was during this time that I met Luke, my future husband. Luke was everything I wasn't: confident, assertive, and unafraid to call out injustice. He loved me fiercely and made me feel valued in a way I never had before. When we discussed marriage, We both agreed that we didn't need an extravagant ceremony. We'd rather spend our money on a dream honeymoon in Europe. When we announced our engagement, my parents demanded to meet Luke. I was hesitant, but Luke encouraged me. "Let them try something," he said, his eyes sparkling with anticipation. He even bought a small recorder to capture anything that might happen. "If they pull any stunts, we'll have proof." So he met them. I waited nervously at home until he returned, his face glowing with mischief. "You're not going to believe what they suggested," he said, pulling me into a hug. "They want Vanessa to walk down the aisle first, in a wedding dress, at our wedding." I stared at him, stunned. "They what?" "They said it's only fair since she's the older sister and hasn't had the chance to get married. They want her to experience it, with pictures and a cake. The whole thing." Anger bubbled up inside me, but Luke's smile was contagious. "We're going to let them think we're on board," he said. "But we have a plan." For the next few months, we played along. Luke met with my parents frequently, reinforcing the narrative that I was controlling and wouldn't agree to anything if I knew about it. He suggested they keep all discussions in person to avoid written proof, which they eagerly agreed to. They thought they were outsmarting me, but it was Luke who was guiding them right where we wanted them. My parents believed they were manipulating us into making my wedding a tribute to Vanessa. They paid for the most expensive menu options, the photographer, and extravagant flowers, all under the impression that they were making my big day her rehearsal. Luke and I were planning the wedding of our dreams without spending a dime. On the wedding day, my parents and Vanessa arrived, expecting everything to go according to their plan. Vanessa, dressed in a wedding gown, was supposed to make her entrance before me, but security, hired specifically for this moment, stopped her at the door. "There's already a bride inside," the guard said, his expression neutral. "What do you mean?" my father demanded. "This is our daughter's wedding." "Exactly," the guard said, not budging.